right, I think we are live. Guys, welcome to this Living Vertical live stream. I am really excited to be trying this again. I did a live stream on this topic a couple nights ago, but ran into some technical difficulties, so we're trying it again. Um, One of the most exciting topics to me in photography is actually a very simple thing, which is sort of the connection that I feel that photography has to history, not only just from a standpoint of creating our own historical record by taking photos and documenting our life, but also just what has been accomplished with photography in the past. And the topic of this live stream is using vintage lenses, old lenses that were originally used on film cameras, and mounting them on Fuji cameras and Micro Four Thirds cameras, crop sensor modern day cameras, to kind of give us an economical way to explore different lenses and different creative options, and also to connect us with the past of photography. And one of the things, the perspectives that I hold pretty dearly, um, and some of you may or may not agree with this or like this, but my opinion is that if you pay more than a couple $100 for any camera that is able to shoot in a raw format, for the most part, it is capable of making a great image. It doesn't really matter what the brand is. But for me personally, one of the things that I find to be different and more enjoyable about the Fuji cameras is not the fact that it technically makes better images than, a Micro Four Thirds camera or a full frame sensor or any of the host of other options that you have. It's the fact that it feels somewhat nostalgic. It feels, with the external controls, very much akin to the film cameras that kind of were used widely in the past. And so that feeling that it gives me is really more important in terms of creating usability and incentive to go out with a camera and shoot more than just technical specifications. And I think that's one of the things Fuji has done really well, just based on the way they've brought film, like the simulations, the film simulations that they've brought into, they've managed to build a really interesting bridge between the past and current technology, and that's really exciting. But I think that another way to accomplish that, or to kind of connect with that, is through using vintage lenses. So what I want to do in this stream, I'm going to kind of say my little spiel about the vintage lenses. I want to tell you kind of how they work, how I use them, and some of my general opinions on them. And then I'm going to dive into the chat here. And it's nice to see Sean Kim in the chat. Good evening, sir. And so I'm going to kind of dig into the chat in a little bit as well, and actually talk about some of these books. One of the things that I want to do, in addition to talking about the lenses, I actually want to kind of give you a rundown of my lens lineup, or the vintage lenses that I shoot with on my Fuji X-T1. And I want to show you some of the photos that I've created with those lenses. And hopefully the streaming software will cooperate with that. Um, I can't necessarily guarantee that that will happen. Just going to kind of switch it up so you can see the desktop there for a second, and then switch back. But hopefully everything cooperates, and even if not, we'll do the best we can and just kind of get through it. But one of the reasons why I brought some of these books is because these are some photography books that I got off of eBay for what I would consider to be relatively small amount of money. And there's a lot of really excellent resources out there, just from an inspirational standpoint. If my testimony is not enough to convince you that that these vintage lenses have a lot of technical merit, I think reading books that were published, this one series is a Time Life photography series that was published, I believe, sometime in the 70s or 60s. I don't know the exact copyright, but they're old books. And when you see the work that was routinely created on what we would consider to be old, clunky, slow, faulty lenses based on our modern interpretations of this stuff, you see the amazing stuff that was created. It kind of forces you to go back and reassess whether or not maybe our interpretation of those things could be skewed, and whether maybe the lenses actually have a lot to offer us. So the first thing I want to talk about a little bit is the three major lens platforms that I have been using. And there are, I'm sure, more. I am not a historian of photography as such. I mean, I'm always trying to learn, and maybe you guys can crack a few eggs of knowledge on me here in the chat tonight. But generally speaking, I pull a lot of information, but I also lose a lot of information because I'm trying to, I got to keep the hard drives in here kind of clear for medical stuff, since I'm going back to nursing school and I always have to pack my head with all that information. So, I do what I can. But the three main platforms that I shoot with vintage lenses are the M42, and the M42 is a screw mount lens. It's not proprietary or specific to any one brand. There's like 7 or 8 different brands that use these, and I don't know if you could see. It's just a regular, simple threaded, almost like a pipe, just a threaded end, and it just screws in. There's no locking mechanism or anything like that. This is called a universal adapter because so many different cameras and lens manufacturers made brand agnostic lenses that would mount on a variety of different bodies that use these back in, the film era, let's just say, because I can't put a specific year on it and I don't want to misquote something. But these are Pentax. I know was one of the main camera body manufacturers that use these M42 screw mount lenses, and so they are very, very widely available. And most of the M42 lenses that I have are somewhere between $40 and $60 in price. Most of them I found on eBay. And then the other two types or platforms of vintage lenses that I've been shooting are the Minolta MD platform and the Nikon G lenses. That's predominantly what I use. Now, Nikon lenses, I don't generally use these for stills. And I put in the title of the stream that I'm talking about these lenses both for Fuji and for video. Now, personally, since I have the option or the luxury of shooting video on one system and stills on another, because I like the Fuji feel, it's not strictly technical or image quality. But I like to shoot video on the Nikon lenses, and I like to shoot the rest of the M42 and the Minolta lenses. Those I like to shoot for stills. And it's not that the Nikon lenses, I mean, these are kind of cheap lenses. I only have 2 Nikon lenses at the moment. There's a 50 millimeter and a 24. And the 24 is really nice for video because it's kind of wide. And the image quality of this lens, it's good, not great. But I like it because it's very tough, very resilient. And for video, it works good because I like manual focus for shooting video, and video is a little bit more forgiving in terms of absolute image quality than stills, because video moves a lot faster, it's more dynamic, and so nobody's pixel peeping in video as long as it looks pretty good. If you have decent lighting, and you have the scene relatively in focus and composed properly, nobody's going to be stopping. Oh, hang on, go back a couple of frames. Let's see. Yeah, that's not very sharp. Nobody's doing that with video, whereas with stills, people have a chance to pick it apart a little more. And so some of my more interesting and what I probably, they're not objectively that much better, but the Nikon G lenses, I just kind of keep them for video. And part of the thing is also just to simplify, because I don't want to have like a million lenses. I have somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 vintage lenses, and for the price and the versatility, I think they really do belong in anybody's kit, even if you're not necessarily coming at this from a standpoint of the history and connecting with all of that warm fuzzy stuff about, exploring the past. And I mean, I watched all of these videos and I was kind of like, yeah, yeah, whatever. But then when I actually invested in my first vintage lens, and which was an M42 screw mount lens, and I saw how simple they were and how like brand agnostic they were, it just kind of blew my mind, because it's a nightmare trying to adapt modern lenses to modern bodies. But these old lenses, film lenses, adapting them to modern bodies is much, much easier. So let's actually talk for a second about some of the adapters. And there's probably a lot more that can be said about the adapters and how you connect these old lenses to new cameras. But if you are interested in getting any of these adapters, I have linked in the description below for this live stream Amazon links to the adapters that I use. And if you use those Amazon links to buy those adapters or anything else, frankly, on Amazon, it will help support the channel, and I appreciate that at no extra cost to you. So I like to kind of put that stuff out there so that you guys can help me make more of these live streams if that's something that is of interest to you. But the adapters that are available, the one that I like the most is it's called K&F Concept, and this is a dummy adapter. So the female side here is threaded to accept the M42 lens, and then the male side goes right into the Fuji X mount, and it locks into place, and it stays in place and keeps everything nice and tight with very little wiggling, and in my experience anyways, no light leaks or anything of that nature. Abel is in the chat, Peter's in the chat. Good evening, Merry Christmas, everybody. Festivus, I guess, technically, for those of you who are Seinfeld fans. So I like the dummy adapters because they're about 25 to 30 bucks. They're cheap, and one of the big benefits, the things that I love about the vintage glass, is that it is cheap. You can go and cruise yard sales. Lots of oldsters have cameras that they got back in the day when there wasn't YouTube to remind them of how awesome photography is. And so they, kind of have these cameras, and, you can oftentimes find actually my 28 millimeter Minolta lens I found at a yard sale. The camera and all the rest of that I got rid of and I sold, but the 28 millimeter Minolta lens I kept because I wanted that. So you can find these lenses around really cheap, and if you're spending a lot of money on fancy adapters, in my mind that kind of defeats the purpose, because if you're spending more than 100, 200 bucks, then you're basically, you may as well just buy a native lens, right? So the dummy adapters, in my opinion, for still photos are the way to go. Now, there are also speed boosters, which are slightly different, and the speed boosters, which I have one of those somewhere around here, they all start to look the same after a while, and I have more of them than I need. Um, but the speed boosters have a piece of glass in the middle, that you can see a glass element that allows a little bit more light to come in and also widens the effective field of view. So you get a wider, faster lens when you use a speed booster, which sounds really great. Everybody wants to know about using speed boosters because they sound kind of magical and exciting. And for video work, again, where the image quality, the absolute image quality is less of a concern, I don't mind using a speed booster. Again, this is all manual focus, so I'm not worried about autofocusing or anything like that happening. And if we wanted to talk about, adapting modern lenses to Fuji cameras, that are off-brand, using like a Metabone speed adapter, in my opinion, the native glass is good enough that why would you go elsewhere for sheer technical performance? Plus, the speed on autofocus, if you're using adapting a modern lens to a modern body, you're losing a lot in translation with the Metabones. So I just don't even go there. But generally speaking, speed boosters for shooting stills, I don't like them, because you have another piece of glass in there that kind of can contribute to erosion of the image quality. And you know, a lot of times these speed boosters, I don't have these linked down below because I got these off of eBay. There's a company in Taiwan called Roxen. There's another fellow on here. I forget his name, but he had a lot of tutorials on the Lumix on the Lumix line of cameras, and he suggested these. And for 9,900 bucks in that neighborhood, these speed boosters are nice, but I only use them for shooting video because shooting video, you kind of have to get everything baked in at the right exposure. So having a little bit more light coming in is really useful in video, whereas with stills, you know, adding a little bit of exposure in post is a lot easier. Adding a little exposure in post on video, video falls apart a lot more easily. So the benefits outweigh the costs for video when we're talking speed boosters, in my opinion, and vice versa for stills. Again, I really like the dummy adapters. Okay, so that is a little bit about that. And if you guys have questions about the adapters or you want a little more insight, I mean, I could go on at greater length about those, but you know, drop that in the comments or in the chat if you're here right now. I'm happy to speak to any of these issues in greater depth. I just don't want to be going on about stuff, um, you know, unnecessarily. So let me kind of run you through the lenses that I have. And basically, I will tell you that in terms of which lenses I have, my lens lineup right now, I have two native lenses for my Fuji camera. I have the 18 millimeter and the 35 millimeter f2. Those are the only native lenses that I have because they're wide, reasonably wide angle. They're good for landscape, street, you know, environmental portraiture, anything like that. And they're relatively small and light, and that for me is very important. I was never a huge fan of like the 16 millimeter lens, even though it's nice and wide. It's just a little too big and heavy. The 18 is almost as wide, almost as good in terms of, you know, optical quality. Although, you know, if you're pixel peeping at the corners, you know, shooting brick walls and zooming into 100%, yeah, you might find a little something, you know, not to like there. But I feel like it's just as good for all practical purposes, way I'm posting my images and looking at them. And it's super light. It's a lot cheaper and very portable. So um, the wider lenses are harder to find because, again, remember, you have the cropped sensor on here. So whatever lens, whatever focal length you put on here, it's going to be cropped when you put it on the camera. So um, you know, you need to, and like in the film days, you can't find a lot of like 16 millimeter lenses for film cameras, you know, with the M42 or Minolta mount that you can put on here. I don't know all of the, I mean, there are some people on YouTube that could give you a full rundown of like every lens made by all of these companies. I can't do that. All I can tell you is that it's mostly like 24 is kind of the widest that you're going to find in these film lenses, and for the most part, they're those are even hard to find. But kind of like 35 and up are fairly ubiquitous, and so if you get a couple of native lenses, even one native lens for your wide lenses, you can fill in all the longer portrait lenses, telephoto lenses with with manual vintage glass, and you can save a ton of money. And I would argue that to a large extent you're not really losing anything in terms of performance, because if you're shooting really long telephoto glass, you're going to have your camera up on sticks and you're going to be composing and pre-framing and getting everything all dialed in anyways. It's not like, you know, you're running and gunning with like a huge 300 millimeter lens, right? So that's kind of the way I look at that, and the way I would recommend that people, and I do when people ask me what lenses they should get. I think vintage lenses really have a very useful place for a number of reasons in anybody's lineup. So I have a lot of lenses that are in the 50 millimeter range, or what they used to call a regular or normal lens. So one of them is, you know, I have the The Minolta is a 45, but it's in that range. And I'm going to show you some samples from these. And the Minolta 45 is probably one of the sharpest lenses that I've ever encountered. And I've had, like, you know, the Nikon 24 millimeter f1.4 lens, which is like a $2,000 lens or whatever. I've had some, you know, very expensive lenses, and this little Minolta that I got off eBay for 45 bucks is as sharp or maybe even sharper. So it's kind of a screaming deal when you look at it from that regard. This is a little Russian Industar 50 millimeter lens. This is, you know, there's a lot of like security camera lenses and like weird cinema lenses. Yusuf was talking about that in the chat. Um, you know, I haven't gotten too into any like weird lenses that are like strange focal lengths or that are going to be really distorted or add a lot of effects. You'll see when I show you some of the images that some of these lenses do change some of the characteristics of the images, not in an unpleasant way, in my opinion, because a lot of the effects of these lenses are, to a lot of people, desirable, and they're things that you might even be doing intentionally in post, and these lenses actually do it just naturally because of their optical characteristics. But this tiny little Russian lens, the Industar 50, you know, it's a f3.5 lens. It's not super fast, but it's kind of an interesting little gadget, and it's an M42. And there's a handful of Russian lenses that work or that can be adapted, and this is one of them. So I have a lot in the kind of the 50 millimeter range. I have a lot of Pentax lenses. This is a one of the faster ones. This is a Pentax. It's a f1.4. Most of the vintage glass that I have is not that fast. I don't really worry about it that much because I'm pretty comfortable with the, you know, ability to edit the Fuji images. And this is a wider, another Pentax. This is a wider lens. It's a 24 millimeter Pentax lens, again, M42 mount. This was a little more expensive. I think this was like $70, $85, somewhere in that neighborhood. So the wider lenses do cost a little more, but I wanted to have something that was, you know, I wanted to get something a little bit wider specifically for video work, and that's one of the reasons why I got that. And then the other brand, there's a couple other off-brand lenses that are interesting to me. Um, there is, so my longest lens, my telephoto lens, it's a 200 millimeter Pentax lens. Again, pretty cheap and works like a charm. I'll show you samples from that in a little bit. It's not the prettiest looking lens. It's kind of gnarly looking and plain, but you know, when you need something that'll get out and, you know, reach out and touch somebody a little bit, it's good for that. And a slightly shorter tele lens. This is a 135 made by Fujinon, which, you know, how cool is that? Using like a Fujinon lens, kind of connecting the, you know, the past with their film stuff and their film products to the modern day FX bodies. Super nice lens, really sharp, very good optics, and again around 50 bucks for a really nice. I mean, this thing shoots beautiful portraits, uh, and it's very desirable for that aspect. And then the Mamiya Secor lenses. Again, this is a, you know, another M42 mount, 50 millimeter. So it's nothing, you know, nothing that fantastic, but it's kind of fast. It's like an f2, and it's small and cute. And I figured I had so many Pentax lenses that I wanted to have something that was going to be a little bit, you know, not just shooting Pentax stuff, strictly speaking. All right, so diving into the chat here, Abel asks if I'm okay with the crop factor. He was saying he was thinking about buying a speed booster. I mean, if you have money for a speed booster in your budget, I would say, depending on how much you're laying out cash wise for a speed booster, go ahead and give it a whirl. You might find that it's not that bad. I haven't found, it's not that I've used speed boosters and I think they're terrible. It's just that I would rather, if I'm going to spend extra money on something, I would rather spend the extra money on a native lens at the angle where the native lenses are going to just perform better all around. When you get into the longer lenses where you don't really need the autofocus that much, then it's kind of a different, it's a different thing. And so, I mean, I think that what you gain in terms of the field of view with a speed booster, you also kind of lose a little bit in vignetting and distortion around the edges, which isn't necessarily a bad thing if, you know, you're okay with that. But if you want it to be sharp corner to corner, the speed booster is, you know, the speed booster is cheating. And, you know, you can only gain so much by cheating. With video, it's a little easier to cheat the eye than it is with a still photo. And that's why I would rather just kind of accept the crop factor for what it is and shoot the, you know, shoot without a speed booster and use dummy adapters for stills. Um, Anul Islam says would be great to hear about the 7 Artisans 35 f1.2. I do not have any experience with them. Again, these lenses here, the M42, the Minolta, and the Nikon G, just old film lenses. Those are the only vintage lenses that I have experience with. I do have a 12 millimeter Samyang or Rokinon lens that I got for shooting star trails and like astrophotography, but being in the People's Republic of New York State and light polluted and all the rest of that, I haven't really had a chance to travel and shoot the stars the way that I would like to. Um, and King Yuzi's asking if I've heard of the Petzval lenses. He says they have an interesting bokeh effect. And one of the nice things about some of these lenses is they do have interesting, if not flawless, but interesting effects in the way that they make certain things look. And I'm going to show you some of my samples. And sort of like a circular bokeh is what they're discussing in the chat. And I've definitely seen, I think Jupiter is one of the other, or something like that. It's a Russian company. There's a handful of um, Russian lenses that have sort of a warped circular, it kind of twists things almost in the bokeh, and it makes it look really, really trippy. And one way that you can research some of these lenses, if this is something that you're kind of thinking about doing, but you're not sure if you want to, you know, use, oh, what the hell is the name of that? Well, you can look on Instagram and you can search the hashtags on there. What's the name of that the website where, I don't know, you guys got to help me out on this. I've been away from the game a little bit too long. It's like slipping my mind. I used to go on there, like you can type in the name of a camera or lens, and you can go through the different images, and you can search the um, the image banks like online. I mean, even just doing a Google search for images will give you that as well. So you can kind of get a look at what effects some of these lenses will create. The Jupiter 9, yeah. And some of these say Flickr. Thank you, King Yuzi. That's like, that was right on the tip of my tongue. I always get emails from Flickr saying, because I used to be on there all the time back when like I was buying lenses constantly because I had no control of my, I was depressed and had no control of my spending habits. But I knew that I would like ruin my future if I was buying actual lenses. So I was like buying these nickel and dime yard sale lenses to kind of get my fix. You know, real stories of, you know, photographers. This is what photography is really all about. And you go on Flickr and like you could search any one of these lenses and you can see images made with them. And in some cases it's like, holy crap, that's beautiful. Like these lenses are real good. In other cases it's like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know if I want to buy that, but it's pretty neat. All right, what I want to do now, I'm gonna try and see if we can make this switch over to the desktop here, and you guys can let me know if this is working. So you can give me a holler if you see this photo displaying here. But these are images that I shot just with a 35 millimeter M42 lens. Let's see, I don't even have that lens within my grasp at the moment, but this is a 35 millimeter f3.5 lens, small, very light, and you know, can't beat a 35 millimeter lens. Of course, on the cropped sensor, beautiful. Thank you for that feedback, Peter. So we are able to see this. You can see if you look here at the corners, you can see there's a little bit of vignetting, you know, and it's a little bit soft. And then at the center, it's nice and sharp. And honestly, I kind of like that effect, but it may not be what you're going for in every circumstance. A couple more from this 35 millimeter Pentax lens. Again, the center's nice and sharp, and then it kind of falls off a little bit in the corners. You know, it's not necessarily the right tool for every job, but the way I tend to edit, I like having kind of bringing the focus of the viewer in from the corners anyways, so I kind of prefer not having an image that's sharp corner to corner for most of what I'm trying to do with it. And these images were shot on the X Pro 1, which I have a harder time making sharp images on the X Pro compared to the XT1. I feel like the XT1 is a lot better, but I like kind of the way some of these colors came out in the low light, that the greasy spoon where my buddy and I go on occasion. And I actually forced him to do a little sit for a little portrait session because I wanted to see kind of what the 35 millimeter, because it's not like a portrait lens, it's just a pretty generic, you know, slow lens. I threw a little video lighting on him, the same light that I'm using right now to light this stream, and you know, just a couple different edits to see what it would do. So that's a 35. This is a again Pentax, and then more Pentax stuff. I wanted to see if that, you know, f1.4, you know, the speed of the lens would somehow overcome the fact that it's, you know, shooting on the X Pro 1 and you know, make some amazing night shots. The answer obviously is no, not necessarily a great idea, but brought it inside, did a few more portraits, and these are pretty old. These, well, I mean, not that old, like a couple of years, 2 years old. Pictures of my dad, my friend Andrew, and caught, yeah, and you can see in this one, like, kind of the way the bokeh is a little bit, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but it's a little bit swirly, but I kind of like that effect. And Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas to Mario. It's good to see you in here, sir. I kind of like this one with the 50 millimeter f1.4. Is really, you know, highlights how crisp and sharp those flowers came out there. Okay. All right, now the 135. Again, this is not. I kind of, some of these tests I just did like off the cuff. I just wanted to see what it would look like, what sort of separation we could get from the background, because a lot of people put a great deal of importance on the how fast the lens is, but you can overcome. You don't have to have like an f1.4 or an f1.2 lens to get really good separation. A lot of times it's just the way that you compose the shot makes the background fall off. And I, you know, again, playing around with portraits with my friend, you can see we got one eye, the left eye here is clearly sharp and the other one is not, and the background is very blurry, and that background is only a, you know, maybe 2 feet or so, 3 feet behind him. And this, you know, on a that 135 Fujinon lens is what I'm shooting with here, and it makes some really nice portraits. Um, assuming your edit probably, there we go. I like that edit a little bit better. Assuming your your subject is thrilled about being being involved and helping you. Okay. If you guys have questions and stuff, you can throw those up in the chat comments as well. This is the 200 millimeter f, I think it's f3.5. This is my longest lens, and shot the moon. And so I have a couple of crops. This is just kind of the whole image. Actually, you know what? What I'm going to do here, I'm going to open this up so we can zoom in a little bit. And, you know, it kind of falls apart when you zoom in too much, but for the X Pro 1 shooting on like a, 35-year-old lens, um, I was pretty happy with what that was able to do in terms of the detail on the moon that I was able to capture. And this is a couple of crops that I did. Here again, you get some nice, a little gentler of a crop so the image doesn't really fall apart. And, you can see craters and all that stuff there. And this is with the 200 millimeter F. I think, let me double check here just to make sure that I'm not giving you the wrong info. Oh, I'm sorry, it's a 5.6. So shooting at night with the f5.6 is 200 millimeter f5.6. So it's it's a little bit scary, but leaving the shutter open for about, well, shooting the moon, you don't have to really use a very long exposure because the moon is bright enough that you can get away with it. And then I actually put that lens on the GH5, that same 200 millimeter lens, just to see if there would be, because the GH5, because it's a smaller sensor, the crop factor is a little greater. I wanted to see if that would kind of allow me to cheat in a little bit more. And there again, this is a cropped image from the crop sensor of the GH5, which is not known for being superior in low light performance. And honestly, like, I was pretty happy with both of these images that came off of the GH5 using using that 200 millimeter lens. And there's a couple others. Let's see, 200. I thought I had a couple of pictures in here. Oh, you know what? I think they might be down here. I shot like a gopher with the yeah, I had nothing else to use. That's actually my my channel avatar. It's my stupid face. I just so I kind of put the camera on a timer. I dialed the focus in on the little, fixture over here, and then I kind of tried to line up with it and, you know, made a stupid face and just, trying to test out the optics. This is like maybe 150, 200 feet from my porch, a big fat gopher. I wanted to see if I could, get a decent shot, see how this 200 millimeter lens would handle in terms of, you know, would I be missing anything trying to shoot wildlife? And again, that's not the most um, scientific way to test it. And this is the 135, the Fuji 135. Did a couple of just kind of shooting my daughter and her cousin. This is a couple of years back, just to get an idea of those. One of the exceptions, I said that I wasn't shooting a lot with the Nikon lenses. This is one of a lens that I don't own currently. This is the 105 millimeter f2, very expensive portrait lens that I got my ex, and of course that went with her, so I do not have access to that lens anymore. But I always wanted to get a Nikon adapter just to be able to shoot that super sexy lens on my old Fuji cameras And so I did a little portrait shoot with my daughter, and I was very impressed with the image quality. There's a couple of these that I really love. You know, the quality of the lens is, you know, it's like $1,000 lens, and so it was a real treat to be able to put that on, you know, my little clunker of an X Pro 1 that I bought off of eBay for like 150 or 175 bucks. Um, but you know, it made photography exciting. And one of the things that I think is really interesting, and I'll go back to shooting the or showing you some samples because I want to show you the Minolta lenses specifically. But one of the things that I think is really nice about using vintage lenses is that you have fewer expectations of a lens when you're not paying a lot of money for it, and you can actually explore where that lens is going to take you, and there's a question that you're trying to answer rather than an expectation that you think you need to achieve. Because if you spend $500 on a lens, you've looked at all the pictures on Flickr and you're expecting to take a shot that looks like this or like that. Whereas if you spend 30 bucks on something, or 20 bucks at a yard sale, and 30 bucks for a lens adapter, it's like, well, I mean, here goes nothing. You know, what's the worst that can happen? And you let that piece of equipment take you on a little bit of a journey and let you, you know, it lets you explore a little bit. And I think, to me, that's one of the things that I enjoy the most. Again, is connecting that, you know, the real heritage and the tactile component of photography that makes Fuji cameras so unique in the first place. It really takes that up another level when you're putting an old lens on that camera and bringing it back to life. Um, and you know, again, if these images that I'm showing you are not convincing you, I would highly recommend go on eBay. People are dumping off books, and you can get, you know, some of them, like this one is, and this isn't like a live stream about, you know, photography books, although I could do one, you know, and show you all my photography books. But this is Arnold Newman, and this was recommended by art of photography guy Ted. I forget his last name, but great channel, and I love his stuff. I haven't watched anything because I've been out of the photography loop, but when I was buying books, this is one of the books that I bought, and it was on eBay for not that much. Another one that is also very inspiring, that I enjoyed a lot, is called After 90 by Imogen Cunningham. And what I really liked about this is that this was like a photo project that she did documenting people that were over 90 years old. And it kind of had like, it was very simple in terms of a theme. And so, like, it wasn't just like artsy fartsy stuff, which is, I mean, some of that is really cool also, but having something that was a very straightforward project that you could really wrap your head around, um, you know, and kind of capturing some of the, uh, you know, the experiences and her impressions of some of these people, is really really priceless. And again, it, you know, it really connects us to the point of photography and the history, that historical aspect and the tactile aspect. Buying books, is Ted Forbes. Thank you, Yusuf. I appreciate that, Ted Forbes. Thank you. You're saving me on all fronts here. Like, kind of my backup photography hard drive, I'm accessing remotely through the chat, so there's a little lag mentally. You know, um, a lot of these hard drives have been kind of erased and have been overwritten with medical knowledge. So hopefully that's a good trade off. But yeah, those are just a couple of books that I've found on eBay, and there's a whole bunch more. If you just go on eBay, they don't all have to be like artists' books. You know, there are like instructional books, and I got a whole series by Ansel Adams that, uh, you know, I'm not going to I'm not going to butcher it off the top of my head right now. I'll do a stream about some of these books that I found, but like this Time Life photography, library of photography series, it wasn't that much on eBay, and so there's all these different. Um, that was really weird. The cat just opened the door, and it was kind of creepy. Like the front door just opened by itself, apparently, but it was the cat. Um, so there's like the print photojournalism, and the photojournalism one is one of my favorites because it really digs into the process of photojournalism at the time, and they're chronicling very uh, you know timely events that are happening with like testing nuclear bombs and stuff like that, and the photography and the photojournalism that went into those things. And it's really cool to see the different things that they're able to. It just gives you more opportunity to appreciate and look at interesting photography. And so a lot of these books, you can find on eBay for not very much. They're available cheap, and they're not necessarily artistic works, but they're still useful in terms of something that you can draw some inspiration from. Hi Zeki, good to see you on here. I want to just show you a couple of the images from my Minolta lenses, the 28 millimeter and the 45, both of which I love because they're both very light, they're both very small, and excellent image quality. So I'm going to go back to the desktop here for just a hot second. And where do we go? We need to find vintage lens test shots. Okay, the Minolta. So these are just a couple images that I took around the campus at college, and even for on the behalf of any pixel peepers who are unfortunate enough to watch this channel, I did shoot the brick wall, and you can kind of see the corner to corner. It's pretty. I mean, I don't know what you're supposed to be looking for when you're shooting brick walls. I mean, beyond just does it look like a brick wall, and are the lines pretty straight and uniform? And looking at the corners, it's all quite sharp, almost too sharp in my opinion. But the thing that really impressed me, one of my favorite shots, and I haven't gotten a chance to use this lens nearly as much as I would like. This is a very cropped in photo, and I'll blow this up even a little bit more in preview. So you can see is this picture of a little honeybee sitting on a marigold, and you can see the individual hairs on the legs and the veins in this little honeybee's wings, and the sharpness and the amount of detail. And this is in the X Pro 1, which for me, I always struggled getting sharp photos out of the X Pro 1 much more so than the XT 1, and that could be user error. But when I put on that this is the 45 millimeter f2 Minolta lens on there, and I blew it up and I saw this level of sharpness and detail, I was completely blown away because I paid $40 for this lens on eBay, and it doesn't look like anything special, but it's bloody impressive. And I think this is a lens that everybody should own. For the price, like, you can't really afford to miss it. It's a really, really superb lens. And then the rest of these photos I'm going to show you were taken predominantly with the 28 millimeter lens. And I'll show you some of these. These are pretty old photos. These are from like 2017, fall 2017. And this is, my daughter and my ex. But just trying to shoot some of the interesting lighting in the woods. This is at Harriman State Park in New York. And again, didn't nail the focus every single time, but that's part of the deal. But for the most part, I found, that it wasn't hard to achieve the focus that I was looking for. And the 28 was a really nice focal length because it was reasonably tight but not too tight, so kind of worked as sort of an environmental portraiture lens, and you know, didn't stand in the way of me getting a decent amount of really nice keeper shots that have have stood me in good stead. And like, it always kind of makes me happy looking back at these pictures of Lilo and seeing her on a, because the kids really do grow up so fast. You just kind of, it's easy to miss that, and life really does pass by real quickly. Um, Couple more here that I liked. I really like the colors with this. I didn't quite get the composition the way that I wanted it on this one photo. I think this is probably the closest one because there's a little bit of the pavement in the foreground, and I like the horizontal lines of the red leaves there. And this one probably gets the closest to the composition that I really wanted. And again, another one of my favorite shots, because of course, when you go on a hike with a 2 or 3 year old, you're carrying them on the way out. Like, they're all excited to walk until it's time to turn around and go back, and by that point you're going to be carrying them out. There's one or two shots in here where I was actually going for an effect. If I can find it in here, I think it's this one. I was just trying to, and like, if you look at this up close, it looks pretty horrifying. But what I was going for was just trying to put a little bit of blur in there, and I didn't perfect the technique, but I wanted to see if I could, drag the shutter just a tiny bit to make it look almost like a watercolor. But I think I have to work on that technique a little bit more um, before I do that. And then I put the 45 millimeter on for do a little portraiture, and some nice lens flare there. Lilo making friends on the hayride. This was around Halloween, I believe in 2017. And one of my favorite shots. I think. Oops. Well, there's a couple different angles here. I was meant to open this with preview. I really like this shot a lot. Lilo made some friends, and the kids climbing the tree. And I was freaking out that I wouldn't be able to hit the focus appropriately, but got the job done. You can see everything pretty much. The focus is pretty sharp. And a little portrait work with the pumpkin, little up close and personal, just to see that sharpness and the detail there on the pumpkin in the low light. Again, all these images were all Minolta lenses. So there you go. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I love the vintage lenses. I think there's probably a lot more that I could stand to explore and learn about the vintage lenses. So far, I like right now I'm on a moratorium from buying any more lenses, just because of the fact that you know I don't need any more, and I don't want to overbuy and have a bunch of lenses that are sitting around. But um, so yeah, if you guys have any questions, comments, I'd be happy to kind of turn it over to the chat. I see Queen of San Joaquin is in here. Good to see you. Haven't some and Mario was in here. I think hopefully still here. Darling Dai is in here. Merry Christmas. And yeah, it's a lot of the old guard. And looks like one of my kitties is gonna come in and join the live stream. Here, Pants. So I always have to take control of Kitty before Kitty comes in and jumps up on the desk, because she likes to just make herself at home literally anywhere. And she's very precious. So my cat had a bunch of babies, and okay, well then go. You're not going to behave. You don't have to be in here, but if you're going to be in here, you got to participate in the live stream. That's the rules. Um, yeah, my cat had a bunch of babies, and so we've been in the process of dealing with that, which has been a lot of fun for the most part, but it can be a little bit frustrating as well. Um, so one of the things that I am looking. Okay, Mario asked if I could repeat the vintage lenses that I use. So just to kind of summarize, I have three platforms, which are the Nikon G lenses, and those I predominantly use for video on the Micro Four Thirds system. I have a 50 millimeter and a 24 millimeter, the f2.8, not super fast lenses, but these work really nice for video. And then I have a whole bunch of M42 screw mount lenses. Most of them are Pentax. And I have one Industar. It's a little Russian lens, which just because the novelty of it, and it's like the shape is like so small and kind of odd. I really enjoy shooting with it for some perverse, reason. I just like it. And then I have two Minolta lenses, a 45 and a 28. And most of these lenses came for, under $50. The majority of them, some under like $30 and stuff. Most of the lenses that I have like a 35. I have one other 24. This is a 24 millimeter lens, but the 24 is pretty big and heavy, so I don't really wind up using that a lot for the wider angle shots. I kind of prefer just using a native lens for that. For the vintage stuff, I have a lot in the 50 millimeter, 45 millimeter, and Minolta, but the 50 millimeter field of view generally is what I have a lot in, and then I have like a 135 and a 200 that are, really nice for some of the longer shots that I was showing you samples of a little bit earlier. This one is they're both M42 screw mount lenses. This one is the 200 f5.6, so it's that f5.6 is a minimum aperture is a little bit, or maximum aperture, I guess, depending on how you want to think of it, is a little bit scary, but it does really well. And then the 135 is beautiful, beautiful lens, and really nice portrait lens as well. And that's a Fuji, and I think that's a 3.5 if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's a 135 millimeter f 3.5 lens, and this is like it's a little bit lighter and smaller, so the 135 is what I really like to use for portraiture if I have the option of doing manual focus stuff. Um, yeah, I have 135 millimeter, 24 millimeter, and then a bunch of 50s, a bunch of nifty 50s, and of course the 50 millimeter on the crop sensor is going to be, I can't do the math right now off the top of my head, but it's somewhere around 70 to 75 millimeters, I think, which makes it sort of a nice portrait, a really nice portrait angle lens. And like this little, the Mamiya, again, it's a M42 screw mount lens. This is a really nice portrait lens. I'll show you some of the pictures that I did a little session with Lilo a couple years ago with this lens. It's very small, but it's f2, so it's pretty fast, and it's just a beautiful lens for portraits. And there's something about the feel of shooting with one of these, old timey lenses that I feel is really appealing. Kind of makes up for any of the downsides that you might have with, having to use manual focus. A lot of people are afraid of using manual focus. I don't think that should be considered a drawback. I think that manual focus is really an advantage, and that limitations are an advantage. And this is the Mamiya Secor 50 millimeter f2 lens. Really lovely, separation and a little bit of bokeh, depending on how you want to call that. Well, let's see. It's Lilo. Lilo being Lilo. And I definitely missed, the focus was a little hard to nail. There was a couple of these I was kicking myself because she was smiling really beautifully. So I kind of got the focus on right on this one where like the eyes are in focus, but like this one is a little bit off and I was just kicking myself. This one came out, pretty nicely. But that f2 lens, like you get some really nice depth of field where the far eye is crisp and the other one is pretty blurred out. So you have to be judicious with it in order to get the focus where you want it. But that's a really nice lens as well, and that was about $50 for that lens. So yeah, I think a lot of people initially might be a little hesitant to try these manual focus lenses just because it does force you to slow down. But I think that you know it's hard to explain the feeling or the benefit of the feeling of slowing down until you actually just try it and see what you can do with a manual focus lens. And again, the price of one of these lenses, if you go on eBay or even look at some yard sales, you're going to find that a lot of these lenses are ubiquitous and you can get into the vintage lens thing for $50 probably in total. And like I said earlier, embrace the limitations and see where those limitations take you, because it's not always about having an expectation of creating a perfect image, but sometimes when you expect it to be imperfect, you can operate with a little more curiosity. And that's one of the things that is actually very freeing about using a manual focus lens. And I think that once you kind of adapt to it and you spend a couple of days shooting with a manual focus lens, you'll find that it's not necessarily as you'll be surprised at the number of shots where you nail the expose or you nail the focus right where you want it. And you'll be doing things with manual focus that you would have thought to be a lot harder previously. It's just you got to practice it and you got to get in the habit of using it. And then once you do that, then like your skill set will grow accordingly, and it'll change the way that you think about your photography. At least that's what it has done for me. And again, there are times when I don't want to slow down. There's times when I don't want to use a vintage lens where I want to have something that's just going to go fast. Like if there's a one-time thing happening where like when I brought the kitten home for my daughter, you know it was a one-time thing. I was going to surprise her with this kitten. This is the lens that I had on the camera because yeah, I didn't want to miss it. And so it's nice to have that backup. I have a little bit of a fallback plan. But when I'm just kind of hanging out waiting to see what's going to happen, I go visit her for the weekend and it's like, we're off on a little adventure, we're taking a little walk. I like to put on one of the older lenses and kind of see where it goes. Um, and I haven't had a chance to actually shoot nearly as much as I would like to with the XT1. Most of those, actually all of those shots that I showed on the screen here, those are all images that I shot with the X Pro 1. And so I would expect that the performance is going to be as good, probably better with the XT1, because for me I feel like the XT1 makes slightly sharper images. Or maybe it's that it's easier for me to make sharper images with the XT1. I don't want to blame it on the camera, but I always feel like I wind up with sharper looking images out of the XT1. Um, so, anyways, that is pretty much that concludes what I have to say about these manual focus lenses. Whenever people ask me, "Hey, I'm getting into photography. I need to, kind of get started," I say buy an XT1, get an 18 millimeter lens for wide stuff, and then get the rest in vintage glass to do portraits with and to, for a little bit of telephoto stuff, and you'll be all set. I want to do a live stream at some point talking about the benefits of zooms versus prime lenses, but to kind of boil it all down, there's limitations no matter what you do, and I think that the limitation of working with older gear is worth the trade-off of having a connection with the history of photography and the everybody and everything that came up till this point, and helps remind us of kind of some of the soul of photography and the point of what we're doing here, rather than um, you know uh, rather than strictly looking at everything from um, a perspective of just technical performance. Uh, Trill Shatner asks if I use manual lenses on paying jobs. So, being perfectly candid, right now I am not. I haven't been shooting any paid gigs recently. I've been in nursing school for the last 3 years, during which time I've kind of dabbled in a couple of things. Um, it depends on what type of a paying job. So, I mean, this is more of a hypothetical question, if I'm being honest, because, like, since I really got into vintage lenses, I got into vintage lenses as I was getting out of the professional aspect. And at some point, I probably will, dabble as a semi professional and do some paid work again. But right now, that's not really so much on my radar. But, I think with anything, it's having the right tool for the job. I think that if one, I mean, yeah, I certainly wouldn't put that out of the realm of possibility. I mean, how many years of professional work was done where people only used manual focus lenses? So I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. The question is whether I would be at a point personally to feel comfortable doing that, but that's a matter of my own skill and my own practice rather than, an absolute limitation of the gear. So where I am right now, if I had a paying gig and somebody was like, "Look, I need you," actually, one of my friends called me up and was like, "Hey, I got a friend that's getting married. Can you shoot their wedding?" I would have brought a handful of vintage glass to do some of the portrait work, some of the still, or not, I mean, obviously shooting all stills for them, but like some of the more staged portraiture where the lighting was a little bit better and I had a little bit more control and I could slow things down and stage it a little bit. Absolutely would feel comfortable using a manual lens for that, given my proficiency shooting manual. Since I'm not shooting all the time right now, I'm kind of out of practice, being perfectly honest. But like if I'm going to be shooting stuff more on the go and it's a paid gig, then yeah, I'm probably gonna opt for something that's a little bit more of a safer bet in that regard, just because of the fact that like I'm out of practice and so I'm not up to speed doing that. Abel says, I know some people who shoot with manual lenses for actual photo shoots, for weddings, portrait photo shoots. Yeah, 100% agreed with that. It really comes down to the individual user being comfortable and practiced with that. And I think that that's a useful skill set to develop. And certainly working with video has made me more comfortable with manual focus because I use manual focus, at least again when I was shooting video. This is all kind of, there's a little bit of a time delay, a lag of a couple of years in here when we're talking about some of these questions. Um, Trill says, very cool, thanks for your honesty. I usually throw in a vintage manual for women's portraits or shots where I'm trying to obscure blemishes and close ups. Very interesting. I hadn't thought about using some of the, for lack of a better term, flaws in the vintage lenses to cover some of those things. But that's a really interesting idea. I like that. Um, I I like using small cameras and some of these vintage lenses for portrait work just because of the conversational element that it brings. Like I've always found, and this is something that's for me is more about Fuji cameras than anything, but when you put like a big camera in somebody's face, it's kind of like whoa, and it puts a little bit of tension into the conversation. And I've photographed people that I know very well for photo projects at one point when I was shooting professionally, doing a documentary project, and a couple of the people that I was shooting were people that I knew really well. And it was very interesting to me to see how, even though we were very comfortable and we had a great rapport, the difference in the way our interactions went and the photos that came out of the interaction, the difference when I had a tiny little Fuji camera and I was talking and shooting at the same time versus when I had a big professional camera. And, I think that anything that allows for a little bit of eccentricity and quirkiness and conversational, like, oh, that's kind of weird, what's that, like, what do why do you shoot with lenses that are 35 years old and aren't like the latest greatest thing, and like it makes it a little easier to connect with people, because the way that I approach shooting people anyways is that you have to connect with the person, and then your technical ability with the camera ultimately reflects your connection or your interaction or ability to work with the person. But like you have to have that connection with the person. And so those little things that can make you seem a little more approachable or make the camera seem less intimidating, I think is always going to be points in your favor, and make you seem less of like a cold tactician and more of like somebody that's throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks. If you can kind of, I don't know. That's just kind of spitballing in terms of the way that I shoot, the way that I like to shoot people. You know. Um, yeah, and Abel says, "Don't worry. To be honest, just use the gear that you're comfortable with. Nowadays, I just use vintage lenses, and my style is street photography and nature." And I think there's a lot of value to that idea of shooting what you're comfortable with. One of my friends asked me recently, she has a little girl. She's asking me about, like, she wants to start, photography as like a part time thing, doing, portraits of, family portraits and infant portraits and stuff like that. And, she's like, what do I need for a professional camera? And I always kind of cringe a little bit when I hear people talk about professional cameras, because at the end of the day, professional is much more about your comfort level using the camera. And if you're comfortable using a camera and it can accurately capture experiences that you can create or facilitate, then it kind of doesn't matter. I mean, I've sold work that I've made on, like handheld point and shoot cameras. So it's not necessarily about, it's just what you have at the right place at the right time that you're comfortable with and that you like shooting. And for me, like I said earlier, I know not everybody, some people like to get into pixel peeping. For me, all the cameras are kind of this, like I see the same thing when I look at the pictures that come out of all of these cameras. It's like, they're cool pictures of old people with wrinkly skin and, smoking a cigarette somewhere in the Middle East. Like that's all the like documentary photographer style of pictures, or like India or something like that. They go on these photo things and they should, oh, this is the newest, greatest, best camera. But like when you look at the pictures that were taken 5 years ago with, an earlier model of the same camera, they're still just as good. So it's like I don't get too hung up on the latest and greatest anymore. I mean, I don't even really know much about the XH1 or the XT3. I'm sure they're great. My mind is blown at how cheap the XT2 is, and I really want to buy it, but I'm not gonna. I'm just super happy right now with the XT1. But for a camera that's like, 5, 6 years old, the XT1 is pretty old in camera years, and it's super solid performer, and and I'm comfortable with it, and it makes me happy. So yeah, I probably would use that, you know, and for paid work, um, just because of the fact that I know it, and familiarity goes a long way. Um, Take care, Trill Shatner. Thank you for the kind words. Good to see you back around here. I'll be doing more live streams hopefully in the coming weeks. So look forward to seeing you around the channel as well. Abel says, I think that a good start in photography is autofocus lens. Once you know your time and your style, go for the gear. Um, yeah, you got to build a style first, because I think that that's part of it. You know, everybody wants to buy gear without knowing the style. And I think depending on what you're shooting, there are some limitations that are inherent based on what you're shooting. Um, but really, the first step in beginning photography is to just see what type of things you wind up shooting the most. And it is very much a trial and error process where you have to be able to accept some limitations in what you're doing so that you can use that as a springboard to then make different, you know, learn different skills, creatively problem solve, and potentially even buy different gear. And here comes Kitty again, wants to make a mess out of everything. And that's one of the reasons also why I do like to recommend having, just like Abel said, having one, at least one native lens in the kit. And for me, my probably my favorite Fuji lens is that 18 millimeter lens, which is funny because I was going to make a video about that a while back. Just how like that was a lens I saw a lot of YouTubers hating on, as though it was like some, you know, black sheep of the Fuji lens family, and it was just such a, you know, bad lens. And like when I got it, I was super happy with it. I love everything about it, and it's almost, you know, pixel peeping blown up. Like you can tell a tiny difference blown up at 100% between the 18 and the 23. Which the 23 is like, you know, the 23 f2, which is super sharp and kind of like the 35, and you know it's a newer series of lens. Hey, Kitty, psst, she's messing with my fishing poles. She's taking advantage of the situation. She knows I can't like jump past the camera and grab her, so she's. Anyways, you know, I compared it. Actually, I think it was a video where I was shooting the frozen waterfall, and I did a little bit of side by side comparison between the 23 millimeter f2 and the 18 f2, and the difference was negligible in terms of that quality. So it's you know, it was a very nice surprise for me to find out that there's, you know, and the size of that lens too. I just love the size. It's very small, very lightweight too. Which the 16 is a little bit wider, and you know, a little bit faster and a little sharper and all that other stuff. But it's also a lot bigger and heavier. So you kind of have to, you know, you got to trade that off, because I owned that 16 for a long time, and all those benefits notwithstanding, they those benefits weren't enough to make me take it out and shoot with it, just because it was uncomfortable and it felt clunky, and I was always worried that it was going to tear the mount off the camera because it was so much heavier than the rest of the camera. King Uzi is going to sleep, 4 a.m. Thank you for soldiering through this live stream, Yosef. Hopefully we'll see you again soon on an upcoming live stream. Very cool. I think I am in the process of wrapping this live stream up. Do you guys have any other questions, any other things that you want to discuss here before kind of we wind this down in the next couple of minutes? Um, I'm always down to keep going if there are things to talk about, but also at the same time, I don't want to try to think of things to say if there's not, you know, the conversation's dying. Um, Abel says sometimes you just shoot everything, and yeah, having a native lens is a must because you can feel the difference between the lenses and the way that they work. Um, Agree with that for sure. You know, it's I don't know. I like, it's interesting to have, and especially when money is an issue, it's nice to experiment with different focal lengths where you can get a mid-range lens like a, you know, a 35 millimeter lens, which gives you an equivalent of like a 50 millimeter focal, or field of view, right? And then you can get like a 50 millimeter lens, which gives you like a portrait, like an 80, 85 millimeter field of view. And so you can kind of get two different classes of lenses for very cheap. And then you have kind of a wider native lens, a mid-range lens, and like a portrait telephoto lens. And you can kind of do that for a lot less. And then depending on what you're shooting more of and what you're feeling like you're lacking, then that puts you in a better position to make that assessment and say, all right, well, I'm doing a lot more portrait work. Maybe it's worth it to spring for, a little faster, native portrait lens. Maybe it's not, but that's something that you can determine through experience, because few things are more frustrating than having that lens. And this has happened to me a bunch of times. I don't know if it's ever happened to you guys, but like where you have a lens that is like beautiful. And for me, the Fuji 16 millimeter lens was this lens. Beautiful lens. Love the image quality. Love the focal length. I loved everything about it. But for whatever reason, it was just such a pain to take that thing out and shoot with it. And I hate the way that it felt on the camera, and it just felt so awkward and clunky that I had a really hard time using it. And actually, so it was always one that I didn't want to get rid of because it's such a good lens. Like I just in case, like I need to have that. But anytime I could possibly work around using that lens, I would always avoid taking it out because I just didn't like the way that it felt on the camera, and it just kind of threw everything off for me. I just didn't like it. Even though the optical quality was magnificent, right? But then like the 18, that hardly ever leaves my camera now because it's perfect for everything that I shoot. Pretty much, I can do, it's just amazing, So it's always kind of a love-hate relationship that we have with the gear, and that's part of the reason why I always come on here and rant about that stuff, because it is, you know, it's somewhat cathartic for me to be able to, get that out and share that experience with some of you. And Abel Castillo says manual aperture ring is the most satisfying thing in the world. It definitely is right up there with the best things in life. And I don't know why more. Damn it, kitty, come back. No, shitbird. Okay, you're gonna help with the stream. Look. Okay, I don't know why more um, camera companies don't make, externally controlled. Well, if I were to venture a guess, it probably has something to do with savings in weight and size of the lenses, and that's probably why they put it internally. But I think one of the most brilliant things that Fuji has done is just moving the controls out in a straightforward manner that simulates what you would deal with when you're shooting film, where you have your ISO, your aperture, and your shutter speed very plainly visible, and all the rest of the stuff. The menu is good, which is nice, but even if the menu weren't good, you have all the main stuff that you need to shoot, so it's very usable and it's very tactile, and having the knobs and the buttons that click, very satisfying. Could not agree more. And it's just, I don't know why more camera companies don't bite the bullet and do that, because I think it would, you know, well, I mean, Sony's got their aficionados. Every company has their fans, and I guess that's what makes the world go around. There's different, people like different things, and so there you have it. All right, guys. I am going to wrap up this live stream. It's been an hour and 23 minutes. I appreciate you guys taking the time to tune in. I would love to do this again. Keep an eye out on my Instagram at Living Vertical if you're not already following me. And I'm doing these like stories here on YouTube to try to update so that people know when these videos are going to be going live. If you have ideas, questions, things that you think would make an interesting live stream to do in the future, I'm going to also link down below in the description if you want to send me photos to critique. I'm going to be doing some photo critiques as part of the live streams that I'm doing, in the future. Would love to have your images to add to that collection. If you're going to buy any of these dummy adapters that I mentioned for the lenses, use the Amazon links, or even if you're doing any shopping on Amazon, use those links just to access Amazon, because I'll get a little extra kickback, no charge to you. that'll help support the channel, help me make more of these videos. If you like this, tell other people, if you know other people that are interested in photography. I'd love to kind of expand the community here and get a little bit more folks involved in the conversation, grow what we're doing here. Um, and so if I don't get to see you guys, I probably won't do a live stream before Christmas. I don't think. Although I might do a quick live stream like Christmas Day, a little bit, just something casual, just to chat with you guys, because I don't really have much in the way of plans on Christmas other than going to pick up my daughter in Massachusetts. So I'm going to be like driving 4 hours from New York to Massachusetts on Christmas Day and then turning around and driving back with her. So that should be interesting. Um, but yeah, maybe I'll see you guys on Christmas Day. But anyways, Merry Christmas, and hopefully I'll stream again before the new year. But I really appreciate you guys taking the time to hang out, and your feedback is very useful and important, and it helps me, get ideas of things to talk about here on the channel, so that we can keep this interesting for all of you and for all of us, so we can grow together and move our photography forward together, so that it's something that's fun and encouraging for us instead of like, a drag, because that's no good. So anyways, um, good evening, thanks again, and we'll see you on the next stream.